Hello. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to our Philosophy Week. We have had a challenging year, we worked hard, and we have been with you every day throughout this pandemic. And now we will conclude. Well, not quite yet, because we still have many lectures ahead until December 31st. But we are carrying out a beautiful endeavor, which is this Philosophy Week, in tribute to the presence of philosophy. In our days, in our lives. Just today, someone shared with me some news. They read a study showing that among the most searched terms on the internet, there are already words like philosophy and stoicism. For me, that was a wonderful gift. I would like to share with you our joy in being able to bring philosophy back into our lives. This is closely connected to our lecture today, because this person, Pierre Hadot, a philosopher who is not very well known in Brazil, a French thinker who passed away in 2010, which is relatively recent, has a very interesting way of thinking. In many respects, though not all, of course, his ideas are very much aligned with what we do at New Acropolis, which is philosophy. Practical Advice for the Art of Living is the title of our lecture, Philosophy as A Way of Living is the title of the book that I used as a foundation. This is an interview book. Pierre Hadot was interviewed by two interviewers who asked him about all the fundamental elements of his life. And above all, there were two things that were especially dear to him. The first was precisely to reclaim philosophy as a way of life, as a guide for living well, and secondly, to recover the possibility of a philosophical mysticism, not a religious one, which is the idea of finding a greater meaning in life through the philosophical observation of life. Which, by the way, is something almost autobiographical in his line of thought. Because he came to consolidate his love for philosophy precisely through an experience that was not quite mystical, but a powerful experience he had in his adolescence, at the age of 15. Let us talk a little about that. So, as you know, philosophy serves as a guiding means, as a reference for life, as that which draws upon the examples of those who knew how to live well, offering some guiding principles so that human beings may live in the most humane way possible. This is the work we have been doing at New Acropolis since 1957. Not only in Brazil, but throughout the entire world. If you have not yet had the opportunity to get to know us, take a look at acropolis.org. You will find our work spread across the world. And you will notice that we have been working along this line of thought for 63 years. And for me, it is a great pleasure to show you that we are not alone in this endeavor. There already exists a current of thought that is not new. It has been around since the late 20th century with some thinkers who began to realize that, somewhere along the way, we lost something important. Philosophy left behind something very precious, and it is time for us to reclaim it. And this is a particularly good time, especially in an unusual year like this one, for us to realize how philosophy can be an extremely useful tool to help us respond to adversity with our humanity intact. So, a thinker like Pierre Hadot shows us that our idea of breathing new life into philosophy is neither bizarre nor exotic. There are many others out there who think this way, indeed, a great many people. Hadot is almost a quintessential example, a model of this way of thinking, alongside the work of New Acropolis, which emerged around the same time. We have been discussing this since 1957. Now, we will see this approach to philosophy through the eyes of such an important, recognized, and renowned French scholar. Shall we? Let us then delve a little deeper into the thought of Pierre Hadot. He was French, born in 1922, passed away in 2010, and was a philosopher, historian, and philologist. He was also a specialist in Hellenistic and Latin philosophy. Well, Hadot's great passion was essentially Plato, and to some extent Aristotle as well, but mostly Plato. And the Neoplatonists, especially Plotinus, as well as the Stoics. He had a profound admiration, particularly for Marcus Aurelius. You are probably familiar with the golden Latin triad of Stoicism, Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius. He references all three of them. However, his research focused more on the work of Marcus Aurelius, particularly his Meditations. He also frequently references the work of Immanuel Kant, especially certain aspects of the foundations of the metaphysics of morals, which closely align with his own line of thought. So that is his orientation. He reclaims his idea, and he accomplished this very well, of restoring philosophy as a way of life. He left behind his ideas, made his impact, and it is important to carry this idea forward. But we can already see that it is resonating, that there is already a certain response to it. Continuing on, he has a multitude of works. I will not list all the titles for you here, even those available in Portuguese. He already has a good amount of works. This one from the publisher is quite interesting, but there are at least two other titles that I know of, and I've even used a bit of them. Which is What Ancient Philosophy Is, which is from Loyola, and Spiritual Exercises and Ancient Philosophy, also from E. Achievements. And there are a bunch of other titles. He writes about Plotinus, he writes about Goethe. These are two works I still intend to give lectures on. Very interesting. His line of thought is truly very interesting. So, continuing, I told you about his experience as an adolescent at the age of 15. Nothing extraordinary, no mystical experience, as he usually narrates, as was the case with Plotinus. In fact, for those who don't know, Hadot was even ordained as a priest. He had a very profound experience within Catholicism. His earliest influences, which he often mentions, and I agree with him that it is an excellent influence, are from St. John of the Cross. But he also worked extensively on the works of St. Thomas Aquinas at the beginning of his life as a seminarian. As a scholar, he strongly advocates the idea that mysticism was born within philosophy, and only later was it incorporated into religiosity. But it was originally a goal of philosophy, to transcend banality, to go beyond the ordinary view of the world. So it is said that he would return from his seminary. He was an open regime student. He would go back home, and along the way he found himself in a relatively dark place, with little light and a splendid night above him. A sky full of stars, a sight that left him somewhat unsettled. When he stopped, letting go of all secondary impressions, in the midst of that darkness where little else could be seen, he beheld the night. And suddenly, through a crack in that ordinary consciousness, he felt himself as a part of the night, as a fragment of that vast starry sky, as a component of the whole, perfectly integrated into this whole. He even feels a certain pulsing tendency both around him and within himself, as if he were pulsating in harmony with the universe. He says, "It was an experience of integration that never left me. And it increased, multiplied my interest in philosophy, because I felt that the aim of philosophy is unity, and that philosophy is uniquely privileged to walk this path. I felt that the ultimate point of the search for all wisdom can only be this integration with everything, the idea of unity." How the night provokes such things. How the night, because what he experiences is not something very complex. Many of us sometimes have these impressions. I remember in my own adolescence, staring at the night and thinking, I am truly insignificant in the face of all this? Or is it that, for us to be significant, we don't need to be great? It has nothing to do with size. Does our importance have to do with size, or does it not? And I was just a kid, too. And I had this question because the night is an invitation to philosophical inquiries. And I am not at all surprised that he and many others have this kind of question, which truly serves as a starting point for a more metaphysical search. It is a question that does not belong to the realm of everyday concerns. The trivial concerns of man, this question lifts man out of banality, rescues him from the ordinary, and thus enters the truly philosophical realm. He said that this influenced his conception of philosophy, even brought about a turning point in his worldview, his life goals, his purpose, and he never forgot this experience. He said, "Look, I managed to experience it in other circumstances, by making an effort, but never as spontaneously as I did there. It was as if I had been possessed by the night, fully integrated within it, without a single crack. That, for me, was deeply significant. It was a unique experience." Well, he is going to speak. I have always regarded philosophy as a transformation of one's perception of the world, as pure joy in simply existing, as an escape from banality in order to become part of a mysterious and infinite reality, as the expansion of the self into an other that is not foreign, since I am a part of it. The perfect soul immerses itself in the totality of the world, as Seneca once said. In fact, this kind of perception is common in the voices of the Stoics in general. The perception of integration within the whole, the pursuit of the whole, was also a very common quest in Stoic philosophy. Those of you who are joining us for this Philosophy Week are receiving a healthy dose of Stoicism, which is so valuable in times like these. Hadot, too, draws much inspiration from them. Well, he will then speak about the matter of ancient philosophy. For various reasons, he is led to focus his attention on ancient philosophy. But at the same time, as a member of the French academic world, he perceives the difference between these two worlds, including the criticism directed at ancient philosophy, the resistance it encounters in the contemporary world. This leads him to dedicate himself, to delve deeper, seeking to understand what that world was like and how it functioned. Because it is not possible to criticize something without entering into that world, without truly embracing it. It is like the idea of empathy. An empathetic person is not someone who puts themselves in another's place with their own personality and their own assumptions. An empathetic person is one who places themselves within the psychological framework of the other, thinking as they do, with their experiences, with their feelings. It is the same when it comes to history. One must enter the Greek world with their perceptions, with their feelings, in order to evaluate the true meaning of it all. He develops a vision of the ancient world that is unique, truly profound. He explains that ancient philosophy was not merely a theoretical pursuit, but rather a way of life. Its purpose was to promote spiritual progress and inner transformation. And to achieve this, it employed physical practices, such as, in some cases, most notably among the Pythagoreans, moderating one's diet and restricting the consumption of certain foods. The discursive practice, which was dialogue, is remarkable because when there is sincere intention in dialogue, it amplifies and brings into flow the thinking of all participants. And conclusions are reached that one could never arrive at alone. There is also the intuitive practice, which is contemplation. Learning to see. Philosophy, among other things it teaches us to see things without projecting ourselves onto them. With our prejudices, with our assumptions, with the traumas we carry through life. None of that. To see with the eyes of someone seeing for the first time, as Marcus Aurelius used to say, right? As if I had just been born, as if it were the very first day of my life. And to observe what things truly are, what is new about them, what they have to teach me, including seeing through them, symbolically. And this was the contemplative aspect and the root of philosophical mysticism. The symbolic vision, the ability to see things as they truly are, and not just my own image projected onto them. As Caetano Veloso says in that well-known song, Narcissus finds ugly what is not a mirror. We use everything as a mirror and almost never see things as they truly are. Philosophy trained the gaze, and still does, for those who are willing to work with it in the right way. Philosophy is not the construction of a system, but the resolution, once made, to look with pure eyes within oneself and around oneself. He will even discuss, and somewhat justify, this idea of contemporary philosophy. Even modern philosophy, basically from the Enlightenment onward, is about the construction of a theoretical system. And the purpose being this very original system, but without any connection to life. Philosophy was not born this way. It was born as an art of living, as the construction of a human being worthy of the human condition. His statements are beautiful, always very pure, very original. From someone who truly seeks to confront the problem in depth. He says that there has been an emptying of philosophical practice in our times. Those who do not feel identified with religious paths fall into emptiness. Very recently, I spoke about that book, The Monk and the Philosopher, where the philosopher in question discussed this topic. Well, there come certain moments when a person who does not identify with a religious path feels lost. Where will they turn? To find a meaning in life, to discover the human values within themselves, to bring them to the surface, where do they turn? This philosophical path has faded, and sometimes people turn to Eastern systems. I am a great admirer of Eastern systems, but it is necessary to know how to transplant them for a Western person without creating a confusion that later becomes difficult to unravel because they were designed for a mentality, a temperament, a worldview that is still quite different from our own. Even more so because they were born in an East that was very different from the current East, where everything is so globalized. So, we have a void, which is the absence of philosophy. Later on, he will talk a bit about the cause of this. I found it extremely original. Although I have some points of disagreement, I won't tell you that I agree 100% with Pierre Hadot. There are some things I would add, I would nuance a bit differently. I speak not as an individual, but from the perspective of the philosophy we learn within New Acropolis. There are a few points here that are not, let's say, confrontational, but rather complementary. But he is very profound and very interesting in the conclusions he reaches. He says, then, that we have sunk into the emptiest routine, witnessing the disappearance of what constitutes the essence of the humanities, which is to shape the human spirit. Pause for a moment and consider how interesting this is. This controversy surrounding the question of the humanities in our historical moment, I won't even get into it, because that arouses passions of all kinds. But it is important to remember that the humanities are about shaping the human being, forming the human spirit, awakening it, refining it, elevating it. And he says that this function would be the very last that could ever be neglected. This must never be lost. Once it has been lost due to some historical deviation, it must be recovered. We must return to this fundamental point. To the elevation of the human spirit, without tendencies, without passions, without ideologies. Thank you. Purely with the purpose of humanizing, of bringing forth the very best within us. In antiquity, philosophy is essentially dialogue, a living relationship between people, rather than an abstract relationship with ideas. Its aim is to form rather than merely to inform. This is a fact. You notice that ideas were being refined, being sculpted. In that pure relationship, it was not at all easy to engage in dialogue. In some of my lectures, I talk about this, about the prerequisites, because today, when we sit down to dialogue, what we actually do is argue. Do you know why? Everyone comes with the attitude of being the owner of the truth, and they do not wish to engage in dialogue. They want to impose their own point of view. I can tell you that even in a relatively large group, say 20 people gathered to dialogue, if just one person has this attitude of being the owner of the truth, the dialogue is already blocked. It simply no longer works. Dialogue must be conducted with the spirit of a learner and with the awareness that we do not know, as Socrates would say. He says that dialogue guided by such intentions sculpts our concepts and brings us closer to the truth, reaching, as Platonic thought would put it, far beyond what common sense says and thinks on the matter. As long as the rules of dialogue are respected. So, he would say, it was a relationship between human beings, seeking the truth with the pure intention of reaching the truth, and not to elevate one's own personality, to promote one's name or fame, or anything of that sort, but rather a pure love for the truth, a human relationship. Therefore, there was no possibility of arriving at an idea that was abstract and unrelated to the human being at any moment, because there were human beings present there. And ideas always emerged in this way, awakened by a breath of life. It was never something that was exhausted on the theoretical level, and it was always formative. I am very fond of a phrase by a Spanish philosopher, Baltasar Gracian, the author of The Art of Prudence, which I recently discussed with you. He says, less extensive, more intensive. I find this such a small and brilliant phrase. Less extensive, less quantity, more immersion, more quality, more depth. And it fits perfectly with what our dear Hadot is saying here. Well, and then he begins to address a bit of the historical aspect of the matter. He will say, I believe that systematic treatises, written solely with the intention of proposing a theoretical system for its own sake, should be dated from the 17th and 18th centuries onward, especially the 18th century. The Enlightenment, a time when science strongly influenced philosophy, and systems began to embrace this cult of reason, where any other consideration is set aside. Therefore, any element that is more vibrant, more practical, is considered to be of a lower order. The ancient genres gradually disappear. He sets out two markers that are important for us to consider. The first of these goes way back. Basically, when we leave late antiquity, we already enter the medieval spirit. This is the first marker that distances philosophy from life. It develops within the Christian world, it evolves, but pure philosophy, detached from religion, loses much of its footing. And basically, it takes a long time to recover. And then comes the Enlightenment, without a doubt. At that point, there was a separation in the sense that philosophy no longer dealt with practical matters, but with theoretical ones. We will talk more about this in a moment. He says that the loss of the conception of philosophy as a way of life, as a life choice, and also as a therapy for dealing with adversity, is gradually being lost. How curious that is. Just today, I was giving an interview not long ago where I was asked whether philosophy serves to help people in any way with their pain, with the suffering brought by the pandemic. I replied, how could it not be useful? Philosophy justifies, gives meaning, redeems arbitrariness. It places the human being as the protagonist of this scenario, not a passive observer. Philosophy shapes the human being with a unique identity, with faith in the human condition, with confidence in humanity's ability to face adverse situations. In other words, it is capable of much. It was born for this purpose. This ancient philosophy had the very purpose of being therapeutic, of bringing human consciousness to the root of problems, and to help to guide the individual in correcting the consequences. If you take, for example, the manual of the philosopher Epictetus, my friend, he will even tell you how you should conduct yourself in a conversation with people you love, with those close to you. He will tell you how you should behave at the table while eating. It greatly resembles Confucius. For those who are familiar with the Analects, it is very reminiscent indeed. In other words, what is appropriate does not take away the human being's freedom to behave as they wish, but it provides a guideline for what is human, for what fosters, because when you have a certain form, you enable discussions to be more elevated, for there to be a higher consciousness in the environment. Form evokes content. I find this very interesting. Haven't you ever noticed this? You are sitting, relaxed in your chair, and then someone you respect and admire enters the room. Automatically, everyone straightens up in their chairs and sits properly. Isn't that so? The presence of someone you respect creates the need for an appropriate form. When you wish to address something worthy of respect, something that can justify a gathering among human beings, it is only logical that form becomes important. It is like welcoming a guest into your home. You try to arrange your home in a way that aligns with what they enjoy and what makes them feel comfortable. You are inviting your own consciousness to a meeting. Naturally, providing what it appreciates is very important. But continuing on, he goes on to say that philosophy has increasingly immersed itself in a formal path, in the pursuit of theoretical novelty for its own sake and not for its practical usefulness. It seeks to be as original as possible, if not by creating a new system, then by producing a discourse that, in order to be original, always becomes very complicated. In other words, it becomes very difficult for you to grasp it and see the connections, for a concrete experience, which truly was not its intended purpose. It was created to be a system that manipulates previous ideas in an innovative way, adhering to certain logical, formal, and content-based guidelines in order to be considered original, but which has no connection to anything else except being an original theoretical material, not intended to build bridges with any kind of practical application. As if, in some way, this would diminish or devalue it. Helena Blavatsky, here, has a wonderful phrase in which she says that a good action is one that meets a need in the world or within ourselves. I do not deny the value of these discourses, but bringing them down to earth would be necessary. Here is yet another philosophical maxim that I have just invented. Landing is necessary, it truly is. The more or less skillful construction of a conceptual edifice ends up becoming an end in itself. In other words, a conceptual edifice, that is the end. It's over, it's finished, period. Philosophy has therefore become increasingly distant from the concrete lives of human beings. That is a fact, Radu. What we have been doing at New Acropolis works a great deal around this point. He will say that there have always been two conceptions of philosophy. One was that of discourse, and the other was that of a choice of life, of the poles. He will mention something that is indisputable. In antiquity, there was a typical representative of this philosophy as discourse, which were the sophists. And on the other side, as a choice of life, there you have the Platonic tradition, the Neoplatonic, the Pythagorean tradition, and so on, as a way of life. And for those familiar with the intrigues of the 4th century BC, they know that these two groups did not get along well. It's not just Socrates. Socrates is a typical case. His debates with Antiphon, his quarrels with the sophists, were a serious matter. Serious. Sophists were those who used words in exchange for a rather generous salary. Paid, sometimes even by the 30 tyrants, there were sophists who worked for them, defending ideas that were not necessarily true. In fact, they were neither concerned with nor believed in the existence of truth. So, this was an issue that, for Socrates, was absolutely critical, fatal. I am here heroically resisting the urge to tell you about the debate between Socrates and Antiphon, but it is fascinating. It clearly shows these two poles. Socrates was a man who spoke about what he lived. And Antiphon, winner of the rhetoric contest, trying to show off his skill, engaged in a game of words that was absolutely empty. And how he is resoundingly defeated by Socrates in the public square, it is truly a beautiful thing to witness. But in any case, these groups have always existed. The practical philosophers sought to impart to themselves and to their disciples a way of life. The others simply wanted to shine. Nothing beyond that. And he continues with a passage that is worth reading in its entirety, because it is very interesting. Hadot says, in any case, to remain faithful to the profound, Socratic inspiration of philosophy, as we might call it, it would be necessary to propose a new ethics of philosophical discourse, by which it would renounce being taken as an end in itself. In other words, rhetorical discourse as the final point. No, it is a beginning. From there, we will see what we do with these ideas. Or worse still, as a means of displaying the philosopher's eloquence. but it would become a means to transcend itself and to access the realm of reason and openness toward others. In other words, it would become a plan for transforming human life into something even more human, which is exactly what the etymology tells us. Philosophy is the love of wisdom, and human wisdom is to know, to understand, and to experience the human condition in the way that nature expects of us. So, let us never say that these discourses are despicable. They are not. But they could be further developed to bring them into practical experience, accessible to all who need a reference point, not necessarily a religious one, to guide their lives. This does not exclude anything. It is also possible to live by a religious reference point. There is no reason for philosophy to be in conflict with any established system, but it has always had its own references. Moral, universal, and humanistic references. And the time has come, hasn't it? Don't you think these qualities are a bit scarce in today's world? That is why they are beginning to be valued. Well, there is a fundamental philosophical choice, as he says, which is an effort toward wisdom. A continuous search to find the best part of oneself. Think of a concise phrase that says it all. Fundamental choice. Do you want to be a philosopher? I want. Do you live in Greece in the 4th century BC? Alive. Do you know what you have to tell me? If you want to be a better human being, if you want to strive for the best in yourself, and if you are willing to work for it every day of your life. Per homine, seculum, seculorum. Amen. It's true. Let's go. That was the foundational element, which set the tone for a citizen who was sometimes a politician, sometimes an artist, and who, within the Platonic dialogues, for example, are called philosophers. The good ones, those who did meaningful work, the 7 sages of Greece, not all of them devoted themselves to philosophy as their main occupation, but they lived in a philosophical way. The famous case of Mucius Scaevola, who is even mentioned by Hadot himself, was a politician, a military man. He was many things, but he was not a philosopher. But they say, a philosophical life. Philosophy helps us to transcend a utilitarian view that we have of the world in order to reach a disinterested perception of it. That phrase by Tolstoy that I always share with you, there are those who look at a forest and see only firewood for their own hearth. To look at a forest again and see a forest, one that would exist even if you did not, that has as much right to be here as you do, and that has much to teach you. Always strive to discern what attitude aligns with the philosophical ideal at every moment, right here. What would the philosophical ideal recommend? So that, through continuous effort, I may one day honor this philosophical ideal in every moment of my life. And he says something very interesting, something real. That Socrates was not a philosopher only because of what he said. In fact, no one knows exactly what that was, because he wrote nothing himself. Others wrote about him, but it was through the way he lived. The Life of Socrates is a great treatise on philosophy, so much so that it inspired the later schools of moral thought. He goes on to quote Seneca, when Seneca says that one cannot be happy, nor can one be considered a philosopher, if we look only to ourselves. In other words, notice that there are certain values that are deeply intertwined. Selfishness does not rhyme with philosophy, and there is no way for it to do so. There must be an openness to the other, an openness to the whole, because ultimately, philosophy is the search for totality, the search for unity, the search for integration. Therefore, selfishness that is not being confronted, because if you recognize it as a starting point and wish to overcome it, there is no problem, we all have it. However, if selfishness is embraced and you are unwilling to change it, then it is not possible to embark on the path of philosophy. It is not at all conducive. It is necessary for kindness to become like an instinct. He says this, and I find it very beautiful. He says that you should practice kindness as a bee makes honey. Why is that? Because it is a bee. not because there are codes that force, demand, or punish, but because I am human, the bee makes honey, I do good, and I fulfill myself by doing what nature has intended for me, just as the bee seems to be truly content making its honey. It is the happiness unique to the bee and the happiness unique to human beings. The transition from discourse to life, the passage from words to living, is the true leap of faith, one that we rarely decide to take. Here, I allow myself to quote Kant. And Kant would say, "When will you finally begin to live virtuously?" In other words, when we will move beyond the realm of theory, even though Kant himself was an Enlightenment thinker. He makes, in his groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, some very insightful points. That is, when will we move beyond theorizing about life and actually begin to live, to give substance to it, to these theoretical ideals? Then he references the opera, and I found this passage quite amusing. Hadot gives an example related to opera, in which he says the following: "Sometimes I feel as if we are inside an opera, where everyone sings, 'Let us march, let us march, let us flee, but no one actually moves." It's quite similar, and I found this example excellent, especially because I am very fond of opera myself. He mentions that, in antiquity, the figure of the sage was a transcendent ideal, although no one was naive and everyone knew that a perfect sage is God. But they pursued the idea of a philosopher as complete as possible, who attains the utmost limit of wisdom achievable by a human being. And this reference point was established as a fixed ideal, the apex of the pyramid, toward which everyone moved, each along their own path, as I have often said. But it was a fixed ideal for the evolution of the entire society. If you remove this, you lose a point of reference. And no one can say who is growing or declining, since there is no reference for growth as a human being. So the sage was the ideal for everyone. And moreover, we knew that the highest we could become was a very good philosopher. And what are the attributes? I've already told you in a lecture somewhere that once I wrote all of this on poster board and stuck it on my wardrobe. It looked terrible. But it was very interesting and extremely useful for me. Every time a book described how a sage behaves, or a very special philosopher. And he also makes this little list here. Look how interesting that is. He holds an ideal of love for human beings, of horror towards superstition, dogmatism, and the storms of passion. He possesses the boldness of a cosmic vision. He has freedom, fearlessness, and an inner peace akin to that of the gods. He never ceases to keep the whole constantly present in his mind, aware of a role to play among humanity, to free them from ignorance, from their fears, and from their passions. How beautiful, isn't it? It makes me want to write all this down and put it on my closet door again. It's worth seeing again, isn't it? It is always an inspiration. In this way, he outlines the ideal of ancient philosophy, toward which all the schools, each with its own system, were moving. Or at least almost all of them. We have skepticism, we have the Cyrenaics, we have some different perspectives. It is said that the Stoics always insisted on the fact that the true philosopher is not only the one who speaks, but the one who acts. He highlights a point found in Plato's 7th letter. You know, I have already given a lecture solely about this letter, where Plato says, "Look, I did not want to remain. I wanted to prove to myself that I am not just a chatterbox. I did not want to just keep talking. I went to Syracuse to show that my ideas can be tested in practice, that I am willing to put them to the test in practice." He did not want to pass before his own conscience as merely a talker. And so he leaves Athens for Syracuse, risking his life, being sold as a slave, and going through 1,000 adventures. But he would not allow. It's not that what he did in his academy was not already practical, but he wanted a more incisive experience to bring his ideas into the world. And this was very common during that period. Plutarch, our esteemed Latin Plutarch, used to say that philosophers are often nothing more than sophists, who neither know how to live nor teach their disciples how to live. Merleau-Ponty, a French philosopher, said that true philosophy consists in relearning how to see the world, and in expressing that vision, evidently, to relearn how to see the world. Sometimes I feel that philosophy also re-educates us, teaching us once again the names of things. And by revealing why they bear these names, it tells you the meaning behind them, helping you to discover, to unveil, to uncover the essences of things in your own essence, so that we may cultivate deep relationships, from essence to essence, true relationships. Kant, in his selection of quotes on this subject, said, "Nowadays, those who live in accordance with what they teach are considered fanatics." There are many artists of reason, but few philosophers. Isn't that interesting? In other words, today, someone who lives in harmony with what they teach is called a fanatic. There are many artists of reason, but few true philosophers. Well, Kant, I wonder if anything has changed today, my dear Kant. Today, it is more or less the same. Those who dare to honor truths through practice, as Blavatsky used to say, are sometimes called fanatics, sometimes alienated, sometimes sectarian, whatever the label may be. This relationship still has not been properly restored. It is still not well understood. It takes so much time. I have been with New Acropolis for 31 years, and it takes so long to explain to someone the idea of a school of philosophy that seeks to weave together theory and practice. It seems so unusual. It takes a long time for us to convey this idea as something viable. It is outside the menu of options in our current world, outside the worldview we presently hold. And it will be. To quote now Henry Thoreau, who was also a philosopher, researcher, and American historian, he said, "We have teachers of philosophy, but not philosophers." That is what he said. I don't quite agree with that. You know why? Because I have a habit of looking into etymology, and I know that a teacher of philosophy and a philosopher should be the same thing, because professor comes from profess, which is a profession of faith. If he does not have faith in what he says, he is not a teacher. So, a teacher of philosophy and a philosopher should be the same thing, but I understand what he meant. These two things have become quite separated. Charles Péguy, who was a French poet and essayist, said that philosophy does not attend philosophy class. That's a curious statement, isn't it? In other words, the class no longer teaches how to live philosophy, but only thinking about philosophy. Therefore, the philosophy that is in the streets, that is present in people's lives, does not attend philosophy class. It belongs to those who develop a system inspired by those who knew how to live as human beings, who create a system of ideas and honor those ideas with their lives. Today, this practical, experiential philosophy is called coherence, integrity, virtue. And it is philosophy. It is precisely the act of connecting ideas with life. To breathe life into philosophical ideas, for that is the very reason they were born. He is going to present a passage, now we are almost at the end, which I would like to read to you in its entirety, a quote from Simplicius. He says it is very beautiful. As Simplicius will say at the end of the history of ancient thought, what place will the philosopher have in the city? Will it be that of a sculptor of human beings, and of a craftsman who shapes loyal and dignified citizens? He will have no other task but to purify himself and to purify others, so as to live life according to the nature that befits humanity. He will be the common father and educator of all citizens, their reformer, their counselor, and their protector. Offering himself to all, to cooperate in the realization of every good, rejoicing with those who are happy, having compassion for those who are afflicted and consoling them. In other words, the philosopher is a sculptor. He is the one who gives profound meaning, who connects every activity. It is as if you imagine a profession as a buoy lost at sea. Suddenly, you take hold of it, tie a line to it, and connect it to solid ground. Now it has direction. It is no longer at the mercy of the tides. Just recently, I was talking with someone who works specifically in the process of modernizing the business world. And they shared some wonderful ideas with me, which I truly appreciated. But then I began to discuss, hold on, it doesn't start there. Let's go further back. Let us restore faith in humanity, trust, the confidence that others are truly interested in my well-being, not just in my productivity. In other words, I introduced an entire philosophical foundation into that subject, which was business administration. If I were to take on another profession, not just for myself, but for any teacher at New Acropolis, any other profession at all, it is said that Plato used to do this. He would stop at the harbor docks and teach how, in any profession, philosophy is necessary. Look, I assure you, even for living together at home. Before starting with all the practical considerations, let us begin from the very beginning with philosophy, for I will tell you about the material, the raw substance you need to build what you desire. Because without raw material, it simply will not work. Because the raw material always comes from the realm of philosophy. It is internal. It is the construction of each one of us as human beings. Because if you bring forth what is best within you, the human values that lie dormant in everyone, it is clear that the outcome has a much greater chance of success. Even when it comes to planning the new year. I didn't accomplish anything I had imagined in 2020. It was the pandemic's fault. In 2019, what was the excuse? In 2018, do you know what the reason was? We plan to do things, to come and go, to possess things, but we do not plan for the virtues we need in order for these projects to succeed. So you don't plan to develop a bit more frugality in your consumption habits, a bit more self-control. You don't plan anything to acquire the raw material, and yet you want to achieve the results, and the results don't come. And what do you do the following year? You go back to planning only the results, never the raw material. And look, don't talk to me about raw material without mentioning a philosopher. He possesses this universal vision of how to build human beings in the fullness of the human condition, from which everything one does becomes constructive for oneself and for society. I never forget this, my friends. There are some stories, of course. The philosopher has this habit, always connecting everything. When I was much younger, there was a time when I took opera singing lessons, and the teacher would say, "Look, there's a way you position your voice so that everything that comes out is beautiful." Obviously, I didn't sing anything and didn't do much with that, and today I don't even sing in the shower anymore, but I kept that idea with me. There is a way you position your consciousness so that everything that comes out is harmonious. And it is possible to build a different world this way, a different society starting from a different human being. So, it begins with philosophy. Let us find this way of positioning our consciousness. And philosophy was born for this purpose, to conceive it and bring it to life, walking within society and guiding humanity. Well, and he will conclude then with a phrase that I also found very meaningful when he recognizes, as I propose, the philosophical life as one of the two poles of philosophy, remember? Discourse, theory, and practice. There would once again be a place for this in our contemporary world. Thank you. For philosophers, that is, seekers of wisdom, who would pursue a more conscious life, more rational, more truly human, more open to others and to the vastness of the world. I find this very beautiful, truly beautiful. And it resonates deeply with that old phrase attributed to Socrates, doxography, since he himself left nothing written, which says the following: only the knowledge that makes us better is truly useful. And now, to bring together the two threads of our talk, I would like to return to what we discussed at the very beginning, which is how these ideas align with what we do at New Acropolis, with our way of seeing and living philosophy, with what we have been doing since 1957, that is, for 63 years, throughout the world. The work we propose, and it brings me great joy that many, Many others are also discovering this path or have already discovered it. Hadot has not been with us since 2010, but for us, this is the idea. We seek to bring back into existence that which has always been, in essence, the spirit of philosophy. We are working and giving our very best so that what already is may truly exist, and always has been, the essence of philosophy, which is to seek to promote the human spirit. And this is our goal, this is our way of working. If this seems somewhat out of context, within our current culture, our current way of thinking, now Hadot has helped us show you that we are not a lone voice in the desert. There are more people thinking this way. Hadot says that at a certain moment, philosophy, when it began to compete with religious thought, it said, well, now religion dictates life, I will remain only in the theoretical field. Perhaps this was a survival strategy, but the course could have been corrected by now. It is time to bring these two parts together because the world is in need of this. And I close with the same phrase I mentioned at the beginning from Helena Blavatsky. A good action is one that meets a real and human need in the world or within ourselves, and not an invented need. Legitimate human needs are those of values, virtues, and wisdom. Everything that brings a person closer to these is a good action. Therefore, it is a good action for us to take these ideas and now give them form and begin to honor truths through practice. This is basically what I wanted to bring to you, and I hope that at another time we can delve deeper into the ideas of this truly original thinker. But for now, we have already presented to you the theme of our Philosophy Week. How philosophy can, and not only can, but should, for it was born for this, help human beings face adversity. And that is it. I send a warm embrace to all of you, and please continue to follow our final lecture of Philosophy Week, which will take place tomorrow, Saturday. A warm embrace to you all.